Hello, my yarny friends. I'm Sara Sach, and welcome back to my crochet channel. Today's video is a brand new crochet pattern release for our Rambling Rainbow Spring Blanket. I love this yarn that I chose, and we called it the Rambling Rainbow because although it has purples and teals and greens and reds and yellows and oranges, it's not a simple striping yarn that looks like a set rainbow. It has all the colors of a rainbow, but they're sort of rambling about. And so we called it the Rambling Rainbow. And then we trimmed it with this beautiful open wave stitch to kind of give it the effect of clouds. So maybe we should have called it abstract rainbow. I love this blanket. It's super easy to stitch up. It's basically a 4-row repeat, and it's super easy to adjust the size. Now, if you make this blanket according to what I have written, you're going to get a blanket that's about 33 inches wide and about 49 inches long. To adjust that, all of those multiples and stitch counts and the entire pattern with pictures is on my blog, and you can find that blog link down in the notes underneath this video as always. The yarn that I used for the Rambling Rainbow blanket is this yarn here. This is called Craftsmart. You buy this at Michael's. It's a medium weight number 4 acrylic yarn. The color is called Rainbow. And I'm sure they called it that because of all these bright colors that are in it. And I fell in love with this yarn. It is soft, it's easy to work with, it never splits, and it's just perfect for a spring blanket. Now you're going to need about 16.8 ounces of your main color. And then you're going to need about 4.4 ounces of the white for the trim, unless you've adjusted the pattern bigger or smaller, of course. Now, you don't have to use this particular yarn to make this pattern. You can use any medium weight number 4 acrylic yarn. You could use ombres, you could use some striping yarns. Some of the mandalas that are medium weight 4 would be beautiful, and even some of the rainbow striping that Red Heart Super Saver has would also be absolutely gorgeous for this pattern. I just really love this. I bought a bunch of this, and I had this pattern in mind to design for this project. Now, this is a really busy variegated type yarn. It's called a Jacquard. And I'm sure I didn't pronounce that right. Don't freak out if it's not pronounced right. But that's just how the colorway is set up. And because it is difficult to see on filming, I'm going to use this teal just to explain the stitches of the pattern. And then, of course, I'll do the white so that you can see how to do the trim as well. But I think you're really going to love this pattern as much as I do. I really love it. It makes a perfect spring and summer take-along blanket. We're going to be stitching today with our eye hook, which is a 5.5 millimeter crochet hook. And then you just need a needle for weaving in ends and a pair of scissors. The last thing I wanted to say is this can also be a really neat pattern if you want to use up some of your leftover yarns in your yarn stash. If you've got a bunch of different variegateds or even solids left over in your yarn stash that are medium weight number 4 acrylic, this would be a great blanket to use up those yarns as well, just because of how the repeat is and how it's laid out. All right, let's get started. Now I'm going to be making a swatch today, not the entire blanket, but I'm going to give you, of course, instructions on how to make the entire blanket. So what we're going to do is we're going to begin with our slip knot. And to get the blanket the size that I have designed, you're going to need to chain 94 chains. And remember, this initial chain needs to be just a little bit loose so we don't have the end of our blanket puckering up. All right, now I'm going to be making a swatch, and so I'm going to be doing 34 chains. But you need to do 94 chains just a little bit loose. Once you have stitched your initial chains, we're going to begin by placing a double crochet in the fourth chain from the hook. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yarn over, go in, pull up a loop, yarn over, go through the first 2, yarn over and go through the second 2. And now all we're going to do is just place 1 double crochet in each of our chains across. And this will give us a nice row of double crochets for a foundation for our blanket. So we're just stitching 1 double crochet in each of our chains, working all the way across our row. So we began in the fourth chain from the hook, and our first chain 3 counts as our first double crochet. And you're going to need to have 92 double crochets for our base double crochet row. Now, of course, I have less because I am doing a swatch. So we're going to chain 3. We're going to turn our work. Our chain 3 at the beginning of every row counts as a double crochet. We're going to stitch 1 double crochet in the next 2. We're going to skip the next 2 double crochets and shell stitch in the next. Our shell stitch is 3 double crochets in the same stitch. We'll skip the next 2 and stitch a shell stitch in the next stitch. And we'll repeat this, working all the way across our row. Skip 2 and shell stitch in the next. Skip 2 and shell stitch in the next. And again, our shell stitch is 3 double crochets in the same stitch. And you'll repeat this all the way across your row. Once you have skipped 2, shell stitch in the next, repeated that all the way across till your last 5 stitches, you're going to skip the next 2 and stitch 1 double crochet in the last 3 stitches. And remember that first stitch is that chain 3 at the beginning. And then chain 3. All right, now if you stitch the pattern according to what I have written, you're going to have 3 double crochets at the beginning, you're going to have 28 shell stitches, and 3 double crochets at the end of your row for row 2. All right, let's do row 3. We've chained 3. Counts as our first double crochet. We're going to double crochet in the next 2 stitches. And chain 2. Now we're going to place a 3 double crochet cluster in the center double crochet of those 3 double crochets of our shell stitch. So we're going to yarn over, we're going to go in, pull up a loop, yarn over and go through the first 2 loops. Yarn over, go in, pull up a loop, yarn over and go through the next 2 loops. Yarn over, go in, pull up a loop, yarn over and go through those 2 loops. It'll look like you have 3 unfinished double crochets on your hook, and you'll have 4 loops. Yarn over and go through all 4 of those loops. That's our 3 double crochet cluster. Chain 2, and then we'll repeat this on each of those shell stitches across. All right. Go in, pull up a loop, yarn over, go through the first 2 loops. Yarn over, go in, pull up a loop, yarn over, and go through the next 2 loops. Yarn over, go in, pull up a loop, yarn over, and go through those last 2 loops. Yarn over and go through all 4 loops and chain 2. And we'll repeat this on each of those shell stitches, working all the way across our row for row 3. Once you have stitched your 3 double crochet cluster, chain 2 in each of those shell stitches. We'll chain 2 and then 1 double crochet in those last 3 double crochet stitches. And chain 3. And the number of cluster stitches will be the same as the number of your shell stitches, because we placed 1 in each of our shell stitches. And then of course you'll have 3 double crochets at the beginning and end of your row for row 3. Now for row 4, we've chained 3. We're going to turn our work. We'll double crochet in those 2 double crochets. We're going to place 2 double crochets in that chain 2 space. We'll stitch 1 double crochet in the top of that 3 double crochet cluster. Then 2 double crochets in the chain 2 space. One double crochet in the top of that 3 double crochet cluster. And so what we're doing is we're making a solid row of double crochet across. So you'll stitch 2 double crochets in the chain 2 space and 1 double crochet in the top of that 3 double crochet cluster. And you'll repeat this, working all the way across our row for row 4. 2 double crochets in the chain 2 space, 1 double crochet in the 3 double crochet cluster. And again, we're going to repeat that, working all the way across our row. 2 double crochets in the chain 2 space, 1 double crochet in the top of that 3 double crochet cluster. And then when we get to the end of our row, we're going to place 2 double crochets in that chain 2 space, and then 1 double crochet in the last 3 double crochets. And chain 3. And so now we have a solid row of double crochets. Now for row 5, we've chained 3, we're going to turn our work, and we're just going to place 1 double crochet in each of those double crochets all the way across. All right, so 1 double crochet in each of those double crochets across. I completed row 5, which is just 1 double crochet in each double crochet across, and chain 3. And so now what we're going to do for row 6 is we're going to repeat what we did on row 2. So we'll double crochet in the next 2 stitches. We'll skip 2 stitches and shell stitch in the next, and again our shell stitch is 3 double crochets in the same stitch. Skip 2, shell stitch in the next, and repeat all the way across, just like we did on row 2. I stitch those first 3 double crochets, or chain 3 counted as 1, then I stitch 2 more, skip 2, shell stitch all the way across, then we skip 2 and 1 double crochet in the last 3. So now what we're going to do for row 6 is repeat what we did here. So our chain 3 counts as 1. We'll stitch 2 double crochets, 1 in each of the next 2. We'll chain 2 and stitch that 3 double crochet cluster in that center double crochet of our next shell stitch. There we go. And chain 2. All right. And so we're going to repeat this, our 3 double crochet cluster, chain 2 in each of the center double crochets of our shell stitches. And again, we'll just repeat that all the way across, and then we'll stitch 1 double crochet in those last 3 stitches. So I completed those 3 double crochets, chain 2, 3 double crochet cluster in each of the center stitches of my shell stitches, chain 2, and then 1 double crochet in the last 3, just like we did down here. All right, so we're going to turn our work and we're going to repeat this row here. So we'll stitch 1 double crochet in the next 2, 2 double crochets in the chain 2 space, and 1 double crochet in the top of that cluster. And we'll repeat this, working all the way across. Once you get the 4 rows down, the 4-row repeat is super easy, and it'll stitch up relatively quick. So what we're doing is 2 double crochets in the chain 2 space, 1 double crochet in the top of our cluster stitch, working all the way across, 2 double crochets in that last chain 2 space, and then 1 double crochet in those last 3 double crochet stitches. So I completed that row, 2 double crochets in the chain 2 spaces, 1 in the top of our cluster stitches all the way across. Here's our last 2 double crochets in that chain 2 space, and then 1 double crochet in those last 3 stitches. And you can see how the pattern works. And so now for the last row of this repeat, we have our chain 3. We're going to turn our work and just stitch 1 double crochet in each of those double crochets all the way across this row. One double crochet in each of those double crochets, working all the way across this row. So this is how your repeats should look at row 9. Now, of course, your blanket's going to be a lot longer. This is just a swatch, but this is how it should look. You're going to have a row of shells, a row of the cluster stitches, and then 2 rows of double crochet, and then we'll repeat those rows. And so what you're going to continue to do is repeat rows 2, 3, 4, and 5 for 55 more rows, alternating every 4 rows. You'll do a row of shells, a row of clusters, 2 rows of double crochet until you reach row 64, which is an additional 55 more rows, or more if you want to make your blanket even longer. Okay, and so you have to keep that in mind if you made some adjustments to make it wider or longer or smaller or shorter. And so if you want to make this blanket the size that I made mine, you're going to continue to repeat row 2, 3, 4, and 5 for 55 additional rows, alternating those 4 rows. And so this is how your blanket will look, of course, if you're using this particular yarn. You have your shell stitches, your clusters, where we did our rows of double crochets, and repeat every 4 rows. And I absolutely love the way that this pattern looks. It's simple and pretty, and I really love this particular yarn for this project because of how the yarn kind of lays randomly. You get blues, you get purples, reds, yellows and greens, some white. I mean, it's just super, super pretty yarn. All right, so once you've done the amount of rows that you want for your blanket, we need to add a trim. And I'm going to show you how to do the trim, which is this beautiful white sort of shell. It's more of what I call a ripple or a wave stitch that's open so that it looks like clouds. Fluffy clouds, maybe. So once you've done the amount of repeats of our 4 rows, as many as you would like for the length that you want, we're going to cut our yarn and we'll bring in white because we're going to make a nice trim. And so the first thing we're going to do is make a row of double crochet trim around the entire blanket. So I'm going to chain 3. And so right in this first stitch, I'm going to stitch 2 more double crochets. We want rounded corners on our blanket. And then we're going to evenly double crochet down the side of our blanket. When you do this, there is not a set amount of stitches that you need. You just want it to look nice and neat. And one of the things is you want to try to stitch in the sides of the stitches and not the holes. You don't want gaping holes. You have to be careful because you don't want your stitches to be too close together and you don't want them to be too far apart. But see how I'm going in the sides of the stitches? That's going to help it lay nice and neat. And so what we'll do is we'll stitch an even row of double crochet around all 4 sides of our blanket. And we're going to stitch 3 double crochets in each of the corners. So we'll evenly stitch down here. When you get to the bottom of your blanket where we started, you'll have those chains to stitch in. You'll stitch 3 double crochets in the corner. You'll work up the side the same way we're working down this side of our swatch. And then of course you'll have those double crochet stitches to stitch in across the top. All right, so we're just stitching an even row of double crochet stitches around the entire blanket. And then we're going to stitch that wave stitch that is so pretty. And again, you don't have to have a set amount of stitches on the sides of your blanket. I'm at the corner, so I'm going to stitch 3 double crochets right in this corner. And by stitching 3 double crochets, it gives us a nice rounded corner. We want our blanket to have that round edge because it helps our next row of our trim lay a lot prettier. All right, so I've stitched 3 double crochets in this corner, and now I'm just going to continue stitching around all 4 sides of my swatch, and then I'm going to show you how to add that beautiful open wave trim. So I have stitched a solid row of double crochets all the way around my swatch, and that's what you need to do on your blanket. Make sure you place 3 double crochets in each of the 4 corners. We want that to be a nice rounded corner. And so I'm back where I started. I'm going to join to that chain 3 with a slip stitch, and I'm just going to chain 1. And those are my ends that need to be woven in. But you want to have a solid row all the way around the edge of your blanket with our white. It's a solid row of double crochet. Now we're going to do that open wave trim. So we're going to single crochet in the first double crochet, chain 1, skip the next, and single crochet in the next, chain 1, skip the next, and V-stitch in the next. And our V-stitch is a double crochet, chain 1, and double crochet. Then we'll chain 1, skip the next, and V-stitch in the next. Now we're going to chain 1, skip the next, and single crochet, chain 1, skip the next, and single crochet. And that's how that repeat works. Single crochet, skip the next, V-stitch in the next. Chain 1, skip the next, and V-stitch in the next. And that forms those waves. Chain 1, skip the next, single crochet in the next, chain 1, skip the next, and single crochet in the next, and chain 1. And so the way it works, working all the way around your blanket, is single crochet, chain 1, skip 1, single crochet, chain 1, skip 1, V-stitch, chain 1, skip 1, V-stitch, chain 1, skip 1, and repeat all the way around your whole blanket. And it makes this beautiful open wave stitch. And when you get to the corners, there we go, you don't do anything different. You just keep working around the corners. Exactly the same. And that's why we wanted those corners to be nice and rounded and not sharp points. Just like that. And you may end up with your V-stitches in the corner. It may be like where we started and your single crochets are in the corner. It doesn't matter. Now, as you work around, you may end up not getting exactly perfect when you come back around, especially if you adjusted the pattern so that you have it longer or smaller or more narrow. And so what you'll do is you'll just do your best to try to line it up there on the end. And it's okay if it's not exactly perfect, if you have one extra stitch or one less stitch. Just go ahead and join to your first single crochet and tie off, all right? It doesn't always end the same when you do an even row around a blanket because you don't have the exact number of stitches, all right? And so this is the way the wave works on our blanket. Here's where my actual blanket ended, and you can see here's my 2 V-stitches, and I only had room for one of my single crochets, and then I joined to my other single crochet. And so just as long as it lays pretty, don't worry about it if you've got an extra stitch or one less. All right? It's not going to affect anything. Just work it in and weave in your end and you'll be all done. And so you can see this blanket is relatively easy. The hardest part, of course, is working with a variegated yarn that makes it sometimes kind of hard to see. But it works up beautifully. It's worth the struggle. I think this is a great pattern for variegated yarns because it does have that beautiful 4-row repeat that I really love. And then adding a pop of a white around the edge for this beautiful open wave stitch. Makes it really pretty. I liked calling it the Rambling Rainbow because of all the colors that are sort of rambling about. And then this solid row of white sort of just fits it together and makes it work perfectly. And again, as I stated when we were talking about the yarns, you can use any yarns that you want. I do recommend that you use a white or a black or a solid for your trim because it just makes it hold everything all together and easy on the eyes. This is my new favorite blanket for spring.